So what I'm going to talk about here is the Stack Overflow survey that they do. So this year, I believe it was done in February of 2020. So this year or last year if you watch it in 2021, right? And so there's a lot of different parts to this. And what I'm going to cover is the technology aspect. Now, there's a lot of other different parts to this, may or may not be covered. But I think the technology part for me is very interesting. The stuff on the demographics, gender, years of experience programming per role is very interesting as well. This video, though, is just going to focus on the technology, which I think is interesting to view over time, because it's kind of one of those things where you're like, I like this program or programming language, I like this concept, and then maybe something else comes along new or merges, or maybe that language you like has a feature that then makes it kind of blow up because its ability to do things is greater, it's easier to read, so forth and so on. So let's get to it. So unsurprisingly, for the 8th year in a row, JavaScript has maintained its stronghold. Let's see, going further down the list, we also see moderate gains for TypeScript, edging out C in terms of popularity. And let's see, Ruby, once in the top 10 of this list, 2017 has declined, and Go and Kotlin seem to be a bit trendier. Let's look at this thing right here. So let me try to get this all on screen. I don't know how much I'm going to get. I may have to scroll a tad, but yeah, that is true. So in my line of work right now, I'm using a lot of HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and doing a front-end React application. But my team also really likes to use Kotlin, and it's one of those things that's a bit deceiving, right? So it's, if you're good at Kotlin, you're going to be good at Java. If you're good at Java, you're going to be able to pick up Kotlin. So these aren't necessarily in a silo where if you're only programming in Kotlin and you see Java, is trendier or has, more uptick here, that doesn't necessarily mean a thing. It's one of those, once you are comfortable with something, you will be able to jump on over into something similar. I think Python is always going to be top 5, at least for the foreseeable future. My team uses that as well, as we do stuff with AWS. So Python is a pretty handy go-to there. Plus there's some data science stuff. If you haven't gathered, or maybe read between the lines possibly, I do a lot of everything, so does my team. And we're kind of a researchy kind of area. So we're not a feature team where we're just pumping out a website and features for it. We kind of grab whatever we need to do a proof of concept, see if something could exist, and then sometimes we hand it off to another team. One thing that I need to get more in line with is TypeScript. I do a lot of JavaScript. I love types. I love statically typed things. I just learned JavaScript, just wild out in the open, and to go to TypeScript sometimes is a little painful, even though I do love, like I said, other languages that have types. I guess it's one of those where you do something for so long and it's just kind of hard to switch over or layer or wrap it in something else. But yeah, this is pretty neat here. Yeah, Ruby used to be super popular. I remember that was the thing quite a while ago, but now it seems to drop off. Although I do predict in the future, Rust is probably going to explode a lot more and go up this list. So web frameworks. So when focusing purely on web frameworks, we see that jQuery is still king, but is slowly losing ground to React and Angular. I think that's pretty obvious, but jQuery, I think, will, like many things like Cobol, like Java, will stick around for quite a while. And so let's come down here and see, because I kind of just like looking at the graph here. So Gatsby is pretty interesting. So it's one of those, again, if you know React, you could do React, you could drop down and do Gatsby here. I do believe this is based upon React, and it's like a content management system or something that could hook into one so you don't have to use WordPress and things of that like. Django and Flask, I've done stuff in Flask, I do believe. Once again, if you're good at Python, you could jump into either one of these. I really liked Angular quite a bit, but once I started using React, I kind of liked it in the aspect of you had a bit more, I felt like freedom, it wasn't as opinionated. But on the other side of Angular, I do like the fact that is this whole kind of setup ecosystem that wants you kind of to do things a certain way. Whereas in React, the multiple different libraries that you could choose to maybe navigate or handle information or set up something to talk to an API, just throwing out random generalisms there, is kind of a bit annoying at times, because whereas with Angular it may all come encased together, React, if you choose some kind of library or product to join in and it goes out of style, or there's just a bug that's not updated, that's kind of a pain. My team also uses Spring, more specifically Spring Boot. This is always super solid. We do Spring Boot with Kotlin. I don't think you'd ever really go wrong there, especially with a lot of stuff that's taken care of automatically for you. Express is pretty cool. I think ASP.NET is going to be around for a while. I wouldn't take the time out to learn it personally myself. If you do stuff with ASP.NET, that's cool, but yeah, it's just not kind of my style. I don't know. You can't choose them all, right? And so let's go into other frameworks, library, and tools. So similar to last year, we asked about many of the other miscellaneous technologies that developers are using. For the second year in a row, Node has taken the top spot. We also see growth across the board in popularity of data analysis and machine learning technologies. Yeah, Pandas, TensorFlow, Torch, PyTorch here. So yeah, Node, once again, if you know, or doing stuff in React, or really JavaScript in general, you're going to be coming across Node almost guaranteed, unless maybe, I don't want to say you're working on something legacy, but it's pretty well known there. Pandas, TensorFlow, Keras, let me see, PyTorch. I haven't used Torch or PyTorch, but I've used the Pandas, Keras, and TensorFlow. If you're doing anything machine learning based as well, which I've luckily, fortunately, have gotten to do, no master in it, by the way. It's one of those, you kind of do what you can as proof of concept, and then you hand it off to a data scientist. Because trust me, all the software developers out there who may have to do machine learning stuff, and you're like, I don't know what the hell is going on, and you're just trying to piece it together because you're not a data scientist, I feel for you, because sometimes I'm in that boat. I've not used React Native, although I'm really interested in learning how to use it, some of the difference between that and regular React. So I might do some video on that there in the future if there's a need for it by either the audience or I just feel like doing it. And I've never used Puppet or Chef. I do have Unreal Engine on my computer, but it's one of those things where I downloaded it and I never fired it up at all. So let's go down here into databases, the popular ones here. And by the way, I'm not going to do professional developers. I'm just going to do everyone who's responded, unless there's a specific category that is of interest to me. So MySQL, I figured be MySQL. That is how most things, I guess, exist in the wild. My team uses Postgres, QL quite a bit. I've never used SQLite or MariaDB. I have used Firebase before. Firebase is super easy to get up and get going. But yeah, this kind of makes sense to me for what I see, at least in the workplace here. So platforms, Linux and Windows maintain the top spots for most popular platforms, with over half of the respondents reporting that they have done development work with them this year. Let's see, we are also seeing some growth in the popularity of Docker and Kubernetes, yeah, for sure. I know my team uses Docker and Kubernetes. Well, I think one of my developers did something in Kubernetes for another team because he got outsourced briefly. But yeah, Docker is super important. That's something that I need to look more into. I haven't used Docker a ton myself, but I know it's super useful when you're taking an application and you're deploying it somewhere. I just have never been in the spot yet to need to know how to use it. Linux makes a lot of sense. Windows, yeah, I personally use Mac OS. That's my workstation operating system. On here, I use Windows. I have another MacBook that is my personal one as well. But yeah, I mean, these are just some numbers. Nothing is really necessarily better over the other. I guess it's just your interest. Most loved, dreaded, and wanted. Now, this is kind of the funny ones here. So, for 5 years running, Rust has taken the top spot as the most loved language. TypeScript is second, surpassing Python. We also see big gains in Go, moving, interesting, from to 5th from 10th last year. And let's just look at this. So, Rust, yes, Rust is, I think, making a huge splash. I have a coworker who's very into Rust and wants to know more about it. I've been interested, or at least intrigued by it for a few years. I haven't programmed anything in it, but I've just been following some of the trends and the hype it's been getting. TypeScript, I think, is only going to get more popular. One of those trains that I need to get on as a developer. I have used TypeScript before, but not as like a power user or in a professional setting. Python, Kotlin. Yeah, Kotlin is amazing. If you haven't used Kotlin, honestly, do it. It's like a just as powerful, less verbose version of Java is the best way I could say it. Go I haven't used. Dart I haven't used. C# I used very, very briefly. Swift I used a lot more. And you could almost guess that as we go down here, this is an inversion, right? So we're expecting to see these things at the top for the most dreaded. So admittedly also, I've not used C or C++. When I came in to actually learn programming, I came in learning Java, and then I went to JavaScript, and then I did Swift, I did a little bit of C#. And it as a beginning developer is very, very frustrating and annoying because you don't know what to focus on. Of course, my advice now is just the basics, right? And maybe pick a language or two you like. But it's tough when you, especially in the collegiate setting, or even in your personal time, there's just this swath of them to learn. I'll say if you want to pick Kotlin, still apply to Java jobs. That should still be relatively easy. Now let's look at the most wanted. Python, I think that's going to be steady going forward. I imagine it will be a predict for the next decade because of machine learning, data analysis, everything. Just the libraries that are there will continue to be used and expanded on. And I think new libraries are going to come in to make the machine learning process, deep learning process much easier, more democratized for everyone, which is a really, really great thing. Most loved, dreaded, wanted web frameworks. So most loved, I have never like super dove in ASP.NET. It just never was my thing. But I can say that React is super cool. Spring, like I said before, is pretty awesome. Flask is pretty easy to get up and going. I did use Laravel for a brief project during grad school. It was okay. It's not like my cup of tea, but if you're gonna do PHP, it's so easy to create insecure or unsecure, whatever the term is you want to use, websites. And I would recommend a framework that handles some of the security and separation of concerns for you. So Laravel isn't a bad choice here, but I don't know if I'd ever want to do PHP development professionally. So most dreaded, Angular, I could see that. Angular is one of those things I feel took me a little bit longer of a curve to get over than React. And the most wanted, React. This stuff is pretty neat here. Once I learned React and what the whole component kind of thought process is, then I learned about hooks. Then I saw, you have the React, the training library or whatever it is for the React router. It all works out pretty well, and I enjoy it a lot. Vue, I was going to choose for a project, but I ended up going in React over it. But yeah, that's just kind of the list here. Most loved, dreaded, and wanted other frameworks. Interesting here. So Flutter I've not looked at. Pandas is pretty cool. Keras, Node. I've not used Ansible, React Native, and there's explosions going off. I guess if you're hearing them, I guess someone has like 200 pounds of fireworks they didn't get to use a few weeks ago. So Cordova, I didn't really like Cordova when I used it a lot. I believe that if I remember right, this for mobile development, it just wasn't my thing. And the most wanted, Node.js, TensorFlow, React. So we're kind of seeing the trend here of the languages and then the framework. So if you like Node, you're going to want more people that know React or React Native, right? So it's not like everything is in a silo. Most loved, dreaded, and wanted databases. This is interesting because I have not seen this yet. So maybe your team or you, or maybe you're going to be on a team. Sometimes you do or do not get to choose a database. I know people that work on giant applications that never see the database. They just send the JSON to an API, and then data is stored. My team uses PostgreSQL, like I've said a few minutes ago. I've used Firebase before, But insofar as me being a power user in databases, I'm not quite sure, because if you get to a large enough corporation, possibly there's some wiggle room there. Someone's going to set it up for you. You just have to tell them, what kind of data you're storing and what kind of types you're going to be storing in there. Ibm Db2, yeah, if I remember right, this is a little bit legacy here. Where I work, I still believe they use it in some areas, but once again, I do not know that 100% here. MongoDB, that makes sense for going along with, your different kinds of React JS stacks you have. MongoDB is one of the ones you typically see in there. So, yeah, Cassandra, DynamoDB, Oracle, Maria. I mean, it really just kind of depends on what kind of data you're having. And it makes sense to have maybe like a document database as you're having a popularity in, data that you don't necessarily care about, many-to-many relational kind of situations. You kind of just care about, more of a document structure coming on in. Most loved, dreaded, and wanted platforms. Linux remains the most loved. I see that being a stronghold for a long time here. Container technologies, Docker and Kubernetes ranked as second. And third, WordPress is still the most dreaded, but Slack apps and integrations newly to this list rank high. Interesting. So I've used WordPress before. It's okay. I thought about, what if I wanted to get into some kind of freelancing and I'd have to do WordPress apps and dealing with clients on top of a full-time job, and it doesn't really seem like my thing. WordPress is cool. If you're a WordPress developer, I knew someone on a team when I was interning that did WordPress professionally for a few years before he came to the company I was at, and he was a pro. He was really, really quick at a lot of front-end stuff. I don't think he was as strong in the coding programming section of things, but when it came to CSS, which a lot of you may laugh at because all you do is live and breathe code, and CSS, anyone could get started and it's not hard, therefore you roll your eyes at it. CSS has a really big on-ramp for everyone, but if you're a pro at it, it's like being that one person on a team who's like a math whiz, or the person on a team that's really good with something that like everyone else will use eventually. And it's kind of nice because you could separate yourself out from the rest of the team of being the go-to person for a certain skill. End rant there, but Linux, like I said, Docker is ultra important. Even if you don't use it or have to use it, I recommend if you're getting into the field or you kind of want to refresh your skill set, look into Docker because that stuff is pretty interesting. And it's used a lot in the AWS, or at least cloud formats. Actually, let's go to dreaded. Yeah, WordPress is an inversion. Most wanted, yeah, Docker. That makes sense. AWS, I know I'm trying to get my time together as I'm reading other books and stuff to get my certifications. I know there's like the Google, then you have Windows has a cloud-based system, but all I hear and see is AWS across the board. I don't know how to really necessarily compare it to anything else, but yeah, this fits with the trends I see at my workplace. And where I work, I think it's like a Fortune 50-something company, so maybe take my advice, maybe not, but this is just a trend I'm seeing. Development environment tools. Almost half of the respondents use Windows as their primary operating system. The rest are almost evenly split between Mac OS and a flavor of Linux. Makes sense here. Well, every other company I've been at besides where I am now, I've used Windows. Now I'm using Mac, which is funny because even at my place now, some of the developers used to be split between Windows and Mac, and I had a friend who's a diehard Windows developer, and he was getting a Mac, and he was just complaining about it over and over and over again. But come to find out, once he got onto the Mac OS, he said he never wants to develop on another operating system again, at least compared to Windows, which I agree with wholeheartedly. So collaboration tools here, GitHub. Where I'm at, we use GitLab. That's fine. GitHub, GitLab. It really depends at that point what your company is purchasing for the enterprise level. I heard sometimes GitHub, at least in the past, could be really expensive. So I think all the companies I've ever worked with are Gitlab. We don't use Slack. Teams is slowly trickling in. Teams isn't bad. Teams is a lot better than Skype. Skype is terrible. I think on Teams you could at least stream without a lot of choppiness, which is nice. Yeah, GitLab is here. Google Suite is, I think, you can never fail with that. They're always going to be innovating and doing cool stuff there. Researching tools. When researching new tools, over 3/4 of respondents like to try the tools for themselves via free trial. Social proof is also important. Over 60% of developers ask other developers they know about it or visit developer communities. And this makes, I don't know if I always do a free trial, especially if they have to ask for your credit card up front. I think that's kind of scammy. I think there's better ways of doing it. As developers, crowdsourcing is always how I go, if I can. Because typically I have a lot of friends who work on things that I'm interested in. They're just on different teams. So it never hurts to ask a friend. And so research companies that have, I don't like writing emails in general because I take too long to write them. Because I have to review a sentence like 7 times to make sure I was very exact in what I wanted to say. Developer communities like Stackoverflow, yeah, this makes sense as well. If you know anyone working on it and you're doing some research, yeah, Stackoverflow and places like that are very helpful. Purchase influence. With regards to technology purchases within their organization, around 57 to a little over half have some or a great deal of influence. So I would say I have little to no influence, but also I'm not purchasing anything. I guess if I was to be like higher level or another category of developer, it depends how your company set it up. Ours is changing. It also depends on your area you're in, but I don't think we necessarily have to purchase anything. Sometimes if you're in an AWS environment, you're not necessarily purchasing, you're more so just using those services. Sometimes you have to make the case for, do you want the company to use, service X or service Y? But you're not necessarily purchasing them there because they're more like a utility. Which in that case, I would say that I have had some influence, but that's generally after your team has discussed it. Top paying technologies. Let's see here. Perl, Scala, Go tend to have the highest salaries with the median of 75K. Interesting, Perl is amongst most dreaded, which is funny. So it's possible that this high salary is to compensate for the dearth of developers. That's pretty funny there. So let's look here. And so looking at this here, I guess it depends on your area. I don't know how to describe this to like what I make a year. I make a pretty really good chunk of change for what I do, which is a lot of random things. But I will say, like I said earlier, if you're good at one language, you could definitely jump into others. So Haskell, I don't use that. Objective-C, I do dread. I do not like Objective-C. But Kotlin, once again, SQL. And the thing is, if you go through like some kind of collegiate program, undergrad, masters, you're going to come across a little of these, or a lot of these languages in little amounts is what I'm trying to say here. So this is kind of interesting. I've never used, some of them I've toyed around with, but isn't until you hit Python. I'm not even a power user at my job in Python. So take this with a grain of salt. Don't look at this and say, I'm going to dread being a Perl developer my whole life. Get that library, those projects, those experiences, those references, because you could go somewhere and just do something in Kotlin, but you can make like $80,000 a year. It all really depends. So don't take this, to be the end all be all. So let's just look at United States, which is pretty interesting. So you have to think too about regions. So if we look at here, Kotlin, right? I do stuff in Kotlin, but I don't make 130 a year. Maybe I will in 5 years. It all depends on how hard I work and the opportunities. But, you got to take coasts, cities. And also, maybe you make $80,000, but like that's a damn good amount of money for where you live, right? Say you're making 80 and you're in Nebraska or Wyoming or Montana or something. You may be well above the median income for male, female, single, or even married for your area. So you really want to look at the numbers of where you live and what those types of incomes are like before you say, I'm going to spend all my time focusing on Go, because there also may be no Go jobs in your area. Correlated technologies. Technologies cluster together into closely related ecosystems. So last year we see a large cluster of web development technologies connected to SQL. Okay. So this is kind of an interesting graph here. It's kind of one of those where it makes sense, right? Node, JavaScript, HTML, these are all a lot of web stuff going on right here. And it's just a fun graph to look at. Nothing too special. Learning and problem solving. We asked developers how frequently they learn a new language or framework. Around 75% of respondents noted that they learn a new technology at least every few months or once a year. This demonstrates how quickly innovations happen. Yeah. So every few months, I think that would be true, because I know in my role, I've only been in my role for about 1.5 years professionally, although I've been a grad student, I've had other internships prior. This holds true, I would say, largely, because even if you're working in AWS, 1 minute you may have to learn a new tool, or you may learn that there's a tool to more easily do what you're attempting to do, at your job there. So the continuous learning is a thing, and I got to say that it's fun to jump into new stuff, even if it's as few as once a year. The downside is that make sure, if your company is wanting you to do this and to jump in and to constantly learn, as I feel, because you're not just doing your day-to-day, but you have to just do these extra hours every week on top of that. Make sure you're letting management know, make sure you're letting your teammates know that either your work over here is going to slow down because you need to learn this other technology here, or just say, hey, this whole process may be a bit slow if I can't get extra assistance, or I don't have a mentor, because at the end of the day, you are a person, right? A developer doesn't mean you're more of a machine. It may mean you think in a different way than maybe other fields, but this also is pretty interesting because I just wonder, and I haven't read through everything here, but how this correlates to possible feeling of being burnt out. Like you never have done enough in your field because it's constantly evolving. What do you do when you get stuck? Yeah, when I get stuck, it all depends. So I typically, if it's stuff in, say, Kotlin, because my other developers or coworkers are good with Kotlin, it's Kotlin even if it's like Spring Boot Kotlin with AWS and there's some machine learning in there and we're connecting a bunch of stuff together, I will ask a coworker most likely first. It depends if I know they're available, they're not in a meeting, sometimes the mood they're in, right? I do like tutorial videos. I'm much of a visual learner, and that there's just some scenarios you could be put in that you wouldn't necessarily get from straight documentation. And I also like the human aspect of this is the situation I'm in and this is how I worked myself out. Sometimes I do other work. Sometimes you won't always have a lot of other work to do, but sometimes it's nice to get up and take a walk. Stackoverflow is nice because sometimes the problem that I have is not necessarily what I think is at hand, it's the wording of it. Because sometimes you'll put in a Google term, why won't this thing work? And then you figure out more of what that thing is, and then that thing could be a split of two different technologies or something that lends itself for you to more descriptively ask a question. And so that has happened to me quite a bit. The situation where I think something is an issue, but then after refining my search, quickly realize that there's this tiny library that, may need some kind of patchwork. And so you could put, these 5 lines of code into your work to shut it up until a new patch comes in. Things like that. But these are all true. I don't say I would necessarily meditate. Never really play games. Going for a walk, yeah, I would say so. I actually have professors that would say if you don't know what to do, go on a walk. Also, sleep. I wouldn't say sleeping during work, but there's been many times I've waken up and within an hour was able to figure out maybe what was grinding my gears the last 4 hours of my previous day. Visit developer community, yeah. Panic sometimes. I guess it depends if you're an anxiety-ridden person. For the first time, we asked developers how they feel when they search for a coding solution online and the first result link is purple because they already visited the link. About half the that's pretty funny. Hello, old friend. Yeah, sometimes you get that, and sometimes you get very annoyed because you realize you hit an issue in a library or a technology that may be very either not documented, obscure, or needs a little bit more, I guess, involvement when it comes to explaining what said thing is. Sometimes indifferent. I'm never really amused. But yeah, these are all pretty true. Sometimes hello friend if it's a basic thing I haven't done in a while. And so we're going into work now, but yeah, that is the technology aspect of this. I know it's been a 30-minute video, but I think when it comes to technology, maybe an IS guy, maybe someone who has a, I don't know, philosophy undergrad, all that stuff. I'm just interested in what people do, why, the numbers, and talking about it, and then talking about my experiences as well. Hope this was a worthwhile video, and let me know what you think.